Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our documentation consultation series. And today I'm really excited to share a consultation with Rajani Venkatraman Levis, who is an awesome therapist in San Francisco. And we are going to talk about a few things today. So she wanted to review creating some templates for things like case consultations, collateral therapy, or collateral meetings with other people, so various others, and even a co-therapy session, which I think will be really cool to talk about. So Rajani, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about you and your practice, and then we'll jump in.
Well, thanks for having me, Melissa. It's always fun to get to visit with you.
Yes. I know you're now a repeat offender for sure.
That's right.
On our QA prep videos.
And proud of it. I'd like the t-shirt, please.
I gotta make one.
I am an EMDR therapist in San Francisco. I am a writer, a community builder. That's one of my passions in the therapy world. And I'm really pleased for opportunities where we get to help each other and we get to build community rather than competition. So thank you for having me again. And yeah, one of the things that I focus on a lot in my work is trauma. And therefore, the collaterals are really a big part of the work that I do because I want to build more of a team approach and make sure that everybody who is working with the same client can get on the same page. So collaterals, and then, the case consults with other therapists who might be working with the same person, such as or to understand from the previous therapist what might be going on, or if I do consult with someone who's transitioning to a different therapist out of state, things like that, how to document those are really important for me. And then if we have time, I'd love to talk about the co-therapy session that I recently did with a colleague and a couple. So
yes,
that'd be great.
Yeah, even if we have a few minutes, maybe we can keep that one in there because it'll be so interesting. And I love your approach too, because you're talking, it has to do with, and I'll share in the link below, your other website talking about therapy, which is a community for therapists, and a lot of the things that we talked about in another interview where you were talking about building community and not competition. And in that context, we were talking more about, I think, like marketing, but also clinical support, providing resources for one another. But I love that this is more in the context of the clients. Still, that community aspect is really important. And we talk a lot about people in private practice feeling kind of like they're in a silo or feeling lonely. And I don't necessarily think we're always talking about clinically, but I think what we're talking about here is, you're incorporating community not just as a way for you to get support for self-care, but also support for your clients and continue to grow as a clinician.
Absolutely. I want my clients to really feel like they are in community and that they have a team supporting them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Yes. And it's so true. I mean, we are not the only people in our clients' lives. There's a ton of people, and the more we can collaborate with them, the better for our clients.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for your help with this. I was speaking with you, and we have a whole interview about creating a template, and my template has evolved even more since we last worked on it. It's been great. It's been a really helpful tool and helps me get my notes done efficiently, but also to document all of the salient parts of a session. But I think these 3 C's that we're talking about today, the collaterals, the case consults, and then the co-therapy, are things that I don't have templates for. And so figuring out how to document them would be really great.
Yeah, cool. So should we start off with the collaterals then?
Sounds great.
Cool. So first, I guess when you say collaterals, who are the type of people that you're typically considering?
So often it might be a psychiatrist or a primary care physician or a couples therapist. Those tend to be, I think, the most common ones. Sometimes it could be talking with a spouse or a partner or someone else in the client's life. But more often in my case, it tends to be a psychiatrist, a primary care physician, or a couples therapist.
Got it. And are there, I would imagine that those 3 people there are different types of things you're typically discussing with them?
I think it's to create a cohesive treatment plan for the client. Sometimes it is to make sure about any medications that might be contraindicated for EMDR therapy. Like if the client might be on benzodiazepines or something, to actually check. I do want, the psychiatrist on board before I start reprocessing with a client who might be on, a whole cocktail of meds, especially.
I guess that would apply with a PCP too, because there could be
absolutely. Absolutely. And then with couples therapists, it can be, also suitability of timing, but also things around, are we noticing the same things?
And I'm just going to take a couple notes.
Sure.
So I can remember. So are you noticing the same things?
Right, to actually corroborate impressions. What's showing up in an individual session could be very different than what's showing up in a couples therapy session, or vice versa, and therefore to be on the same page.
Awesome. And are these usually meetings that happen like kind of at the beginning of therapy? Do they happen throughout? When?
I think definitely at the beginning of therapy, but sometimes it also happens that a client has begun therapy and then I make the recommendation that they work with a psychiatrist. So that might come in later. And in those cases, sometimes I do get a release, sometimes to even speak with a psychiatrist prior to their appointment with the client. I've had a couple cases where I have asked the client, would you like me to collaborate care so that they have a little background information about, what we're working on before you go. And some clients are really appreciative of that support. And I might even make the call with the client in the room sometimes.
Okay, yeah. Very cool. Awesome. And do you have, because a lot of times, we have this like in our head, like sort of like a checklist of things you typically like to cover with each of those types of people, or is it a lot more like individualized based on what's going on with your particular client? I know we talked about like the medications with the physician or the psychiatrist.
I don't know that I actually have a checklist. I think it tends to be much more individualized. And usually if I'm planning a collateral phone call, then I will take some time with the client's file and sit down and make some notes for myself before I get on the call. One of the things that I don't like is getting on the call and then feeling like, oh, wait, you asked me a question? I don't really have an answer to that, but I feel like I should know that detail. And so I like to spend a little time sitting with a client's file before I get on the call.
And I would imagine these are usually phone calls. Are they ever in person?
No, almost never in person.
Cool. And then you said you always talk with the client beforehand, get a release. Yeah. Sometimes the client's there, sometimes they're not.
Right. More often than not, the client's not. But it does happen. I do offer clients the option when it's pertinent or helpful.
And I know this question will come up, so I'll go ahead and ask, even though it's not particularly related to the template. Do you charge people for this?
No. I mean, it is in my policies that if it is, beyond 15 to 20 minutes, then I will charge people, but rarely do these conversations last, an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. They tend to be pretty brief conversations. Given that my policy is 15 to 20 minutes, if the call lasted 25 minutes, I don't charge a client for that. Right. But I have in my policies, and I have actually charged clients for providing written documentation that might take a long time. If it's something that is going to take me hours to provide, I have charged clients.
And that would be like letters or some kind of a report or something. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that, because I know people will be like wondering about that. And that makes sense. I think, you know, I know I consider that with my fees, like there are certain things I'm figuring that I'll spend time doing. And so I sort of price that into.
Right. I mean, I think if I had a client where I was needing to collaborate with their team every single week, then I think that would definitely change my policy on this. Then I would enforce my policy much more strictly.
Yeah. 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 And when I think about I think that's more common if you work like in an agency setting or a nonprofit, right? Where maybe there's like a case manager, the psychiatrist is right there. You might talk to them more often, that kind of thing. But we did bill, in this case, Medi-Cal, you know, for those conversations. So that was, expected to be a much more regular part of the treatment.
Right.
Okay, cool. Well, I am going to share my screen here so you can see what I've jotted down. And then I think that'll make it easier for us to outline something. Can you see it?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I was just thinking about the things that you do kind of ahead of time, get a release, review the file, and then it sounds like out of that process, not the release necessarily, but out of reviewing the file and sort of knowing what you have in your head, then you create maybe like 1 or 2 or 3 things that you want to make sure to review with whoever this collateral person is.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so, okay.
I think often I start off by even asking, especially if it's another therapist, I start out by asking if they have any impressions that they would like to share. Because as you're asking questions is when I'm sort of reviewing what tends to happen in these calls.
I like that. And so I'm looking at these and I'm, you know, obviously they're kind of different. And I'm wondering if you want to have like a specific template to use for each one, or if you want one collateral template that's fairly open or, you know, variable that you can apply to any type of person you might have a collateral consult with.
I'm leaning towards the having one, although I can also make the argument for very specific ones, but I'm kind of leaning towards having the one template.
Yeah, I think just for simplicity's sake, makes it easiest. So I wonder if you would want to have maybe like just a little checkbox, like release, obtained, or you know, whatever wording you like. And then I even wonder if you would want to kind of incorporate that file review that you're doing with the template and have like, you know, things to review or
like notes from file review.
I like that, notes from file review.
And then it could like maybe be like 2 or 3 bullet points right there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sort of thinking of that other template you have where you have like your check boxes, which obviously you do for like the release, and then for the notes from file review, you just have, you know, like a checkbox and a couple of lines or something like that. If I do this once, then I can copy and paste it. Yeah, sweet. So, you know, and maybe you have like, like 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
So maybe just for the sake of this, we'll put 1 as sleep issues, right? Maybe for this particular client.
Yeah, definitely.
And then 2 as any contraindications for EMDR therapy. So whether that might be medication specific to talking with a PCP or psychiatrist, or whether it might be something that a couples therapist is aware of that I'm not. And then what's a good 3?
Well, we don't have to have 3.
Okay, great. Okay, 2.
So these are kind of like your notes, things that you want to make sure to bring up with them. And then obviously we'll have a section for the information that you receive from this person. And I'm trying to think of what, and I almost wonder if this contraindications could be its own section.
Sure.
Because it's something that you're probably addressing with everyone regardless. Is that true?
Yeah.
So I wonder, if that could be like a subsection of the, I'm just thinking it's almost like a response section from the client, but it would be, I don't know, we could call it collateral information.
I like it.
And this could be, like a subsection of that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess collateral information, like could that contain perhaps clinical impressions from, whoever I'm speaking with?
Yes. I'm going up here. So you had clinical impressions. And then you said before, a lot of it really is focused on treatment planning, right? So maybe, I'm not sure like how you might want to word that, or if you even want to put that, if you want to have like a treatment planning or like treatment plan section where you just ask them.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that something that you feel like you would use?
Absolutely.
And yes, it could be collateral treatment plan, right? Because you don't know, you might talk to a psychiatrist and they're working on something totally different.
True. Oh, I think maybe I understood that a little bit differently when you said treatment plan, like sort of collaboratively, would it be agree on that I would be working on, but perhaps I also need to know what are they working on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say I agree with having both. And maybe that's sort of like the last section is like, what are your plans together moving forward?
So maybe collaborative treatment plan?
I like it.
We're on a roll with the C's, aren't we, today?
I know. Love the alliteration. Cool. So that works pretty well.
That's fantastic.
And now, does this feel like it might cover everything that you would want?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do this just to kind of give people maybe an impression of what it might look like. And maybe you would just have up here that writing.
Sure.
And I would say, I would probably leave a lot of this just as open, free text. But you did have some things that you sort of, if you have things that you review with people all the time, then you could easily add a couple check boxes within each section too.
I think what I like about creating templates is that over time, then you get to see what part of it you use most and how you use it, and therefore then you can make the required adaptations. So absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. And that's what I recommend. I can link to that too. I have a blog post where I talk about creating your own template, and that's the best way to do it, right? Is to sort of start out like this, review your notes or how you've been writing, and then continue to add things in that you find yourself writing all the time. You're like, okay, I write this enough that maybe I'll just make a checkbox. Cool.
Perfect.
I like it. Awesome. Cool. And I'll send this to you later so you actually have something.
How about if there was, and here I'm going out on a limb, but how about if we actually put the possibility of areas of agreement/disagreement?
Oh, I like that. And would you see that as like its own section?
Like under collateral information, perhaps under clinical impressions?
Okay.
Or maybe under, right below collateral treatment plan, perhaps?
That's true.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
It could be either way, yeah. You said areas of agreement, disagreement?
I mean, I can see how, we can be on the same page with providers on some things and really want to document, and that we can also be on disagreement with a provider about something and want to document that there's an area of disagreement.
Absolutely. I could definitely see that too. Yeah. And then that's one of those things, if you find that it's really not necessary, you can take it out later.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it sort of prompts you. I see that it's almost like having like an SI, like a suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation checkbox
Right.
on your regular notes. Like
Right.
you might not use it for a lot of people, but sometimes it's really important to remind yourself.
Exactly. Now, I do think it comes up a lot, though, that there are some areas that you're strongly in agreement with another provider, and therefore it's helpful to document that it wasn't just your impression or opinion, or, you know, that, and then at the same time, you might, like, the other provider might say, well, I don't agree with blah, 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 you know, or, for example, maybe the other provider says, I don't agree with the idea that this client is also seeing this other psychiatrist. It's not a good idea. And you're like, well, it seems like that seems to be going well. So for example, if I'm collaborating with a couples therapist, right, and they're like, well, but they're working with this psychiatrist, and I think that psychiatrist is a terrible choice. And I'm like,
right.
well, but it seems to be going well. Maybe I want to document.
Yeah, absolutely. Or I can even think one thing that comes up in my practice a little bit more often is people who are getting medication from their PCP and their PCP feels comfortable, you know, giving some psych meds, but is not, you know, does not seem to be like a specialist in that area.
Right.
And while the PCP is like, yeah, I'm cool just giving it to them, it's like, but I think you might want to see someone who is a specialist who can try out different things, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. I
Great.
like it.
This
awesome.
looks good.
Oh,
okay.
Cool. All right. So, and yes, it's a good place to start. So then the next thing that we were going to cover, and I'll just keep this open here. Go away. Is collateral. We were going to talk about consultations. So this could be endless, but what are maybe some common things that you reach out to people for case consultation?
Well, especially doing EMDR therapy, I've been in consult groups for a long time, and I do tend to regularly consult. It's even part of my informed consent that I do regular consultation, as is ethical, to make sure that my clients are getting the best quality of care possible. So I do speak with other EMDR therapists about my cases on a regular basis.
And they're usually
for a while I worked specifically with one consultant.
Oh, okay. Was that when you were training or even after that? Even
after that. I found it really helpful to have an ongoing relationship with one consultant. And now I tend to consult with different colleagues based on kind of their areas of specialization as well, right? You know, the colleague who's really good at ego state work, or the colleague who's really good at, you know, more focusing on addiction within EMDR therapy. So different expertise.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because you're consulting with other people who are also really familiar with probably trauma, right? But there's a million different things within trauma. And because I know, like, on your practice website, you have culturally attuned EMDR therapy, right? So then that could be something maybe another therapist is seeking you out for consultation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So within the context of EMDR, just looking at other various things that might impact treatment.
And actually, you bring up a good point. I was thinking about documenting the consults where I am asking for somebody to consult on my case, but how about when somebody else asks me to consult on their case? What kind of documentation, you know, would be helpful for me to hold or save on that?
Yeah, I know. I didn't think about that either. And that I think might actually be a little bit quicker. But for that, I mean, you don't have any client file. So I think maybe I don't think you need to document it, but if you wanted to, you could have like a file on your computer like this, or in a cloud software, or you could even have, if you use an EHR, you could create a fake client just as a place to house all those notes if you want to make sure it's somewhere secure. And you could, just keep the name of the therapist with whom you consulted and maybe a brief summary of the case and what your impressions or recommendations were.
So I do also provide EMDR consultation on a fee basis for those who are working towards certification. For them, I do keep notes for each of my consultees.
Right, because it's sort of like supervision in a way.
Yes, yes. So I do keep notes, very specific, 27-year-old Korean cisgender male client, whatever the, basic details of the case and what the question was and a little bit of my recommendations. But when it's a colleague who's just calling to say, hey, I want to ask a question about this or that, when it's not so much a formal consultation, on the other hand, what would be my ethical or legal responsibility if that colleague were to ever have their records subpoenaed and they said, oh, I consulted with Rajani on such and such a date about such and such, and she said.
Right. Yeah.
God forbid such a situation ever come up, but on the other hand, we're just positing, right?
Yeah. And this would be obviously a better question for probably a lawyer of some kind. But I think my impression would be it was still the responsibility is still of the other therapist, because it's their responsibility not only to seek out consultation, but to seek out consultation from competent people, right? So I wouldn't, if I have a client who I'm seeing because they have ADHD and then things come up and I think there's a lot of trauma, I know that the trauma really needs to be addressed before we're going to make progress on ADHD stuff. So that might be someone I could consult with you about, or I would even just, refer them to other trauma therapists here in the area, whatever. However, let's say I thought someone needed psychological testing or something like that, then it's up to me to know, who has training in that area and go and talk to them about that. So I can't imagine, but you never know. I mean, if it's some crazy case with somebody super famous, you never know what could happen, right?
We'll just hope that we don't have to find out.
Yeah, and that you don't end up in some documentary somewhere. But I would think, but yeah, it is something, I think it's something to consider. And I think each clinician would probably have different views on whether or not they think it's important to keep their own notes about that or not. Yeah. Do you keep notes on those when you have like a random colleague call you about that?
No.
Yeah. And I don't think most people would.
Yeah.
So if anyone's listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, do I have to do that now? I definitely don't think that's the standard of care, which is what we go by. Yeah. But I could definitely see a case for if, maybe you saw it happening a lot, or if you did consult with someone and it was something kind of concerning, like where you had an ethical concern about the therapist. That's more what I'm thinking.
Yes.
That you might want to document somewhere, but that would really just be your own personal records.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So case consultations for your clients where you're seeking consultation.
Yes.
So there's a bunch of different circumstances where this might happen.
So I'll just pick what even happened this morning.
Okay. That's a good one. Yeah.
I've started working with a new client that I have seen for 2 sessions, and the client's therapist has moved out of town, and therefore there was a warm-ish handoff where this therapist did contact me, with the client's permission and say, I think that you would be a really good match for this client, and I want to make sure that they're going to be well cared for, so I'd like to have the client come in and see you. And so now we've had 2 separate occasions where I have spoken with this therapist at a little bit more detail, including this morning. So documenting that.
Right. And that was because something happened with the client where you thought, it would be really helpful to talk with the person who was treating this client beforehand.
Right. Especially because this client has a really long, complicated history of trauma. So, While on the phone, I'm like taking a bunch of notes on a scrap of paper that was right there. So I do have, some record of this conversation because it was going to be helpful to me. And that's how I like to think of most of my notes, as this is going to be helpful in some way,
Right.
not just as an obligation. And so clearly this is something that I know I would like to track. And so it'd be helpful to figure out, like how to do it in a way that feels a little bit less haphazard. Like what's on here is very much random bullet points and things.
Totally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, again, like, sort of like this template, you'll want to keep it kind of open because
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be totally different, right?
Yeah.
Things that kind of jump out to me at first are like your clinical rationale.
Sure.
For the consultation, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's really the basis.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's almost like your, reason for seeking treatment or care
Right.
question or whatever.
Right.
And then sort of like we had up here, the clinical impressions from
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And then you probably want to have sort of like a plan section at the end, like what is the result, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what you'd want to call it, like decisions or discussion or even just plan. Sometimes being simple. But
Yeah. I think plan, because I'm looking here on my notes and I actually have like a little bullet point that says step 1. So apparently I came away from this conversation with some ideas of like things that I really think would be helpful, a good next place to go.
Yes. And that makes sense. I'm just doing this so I know what is what here. This is sort of what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That you would have like a really brief rationale for your consultation, which is also sort of like wrapping your head around it right at the beginning, because it does seem like, because you take paper notes, this is something you could literally have in front of you while you're on the phone with this person and be writing down.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have I might just keep it open and just have like a discussion session and then maybe some different points that you want to cover.
Sure.
And then the plan.
Yeah.
Are there certain things that you tend to seek out from other EMDR therapists when you're consulting with them, or in this case, I'm not sure if this was an EMDR therapist, the client's previous therapist, but
was an EMDR therapist as well. What am I often looking for? I guess, anything pertinent to trauma history that I might not be aware of or might not be making the accurate link. So sometimes I think actually oftentimes it's there's a helpful questions. So years ago, I had a consultant who said to me very early on, so my job is to ask you a lot of questions. That's why you hired me, because I have good questions. But that doesn't mean I expect you to know the answers to all the questions I'm asking. It just means that these are helpful questions to hold on to. And maybe you'll have already checked out some of them, and maybe some of them you'll hold on to and appropriately utilize as part of your treatment and assessment process. And I thought it was so helpful. And so I've always held on to that idea that there are helpful questions, and that in my consultations, what often comes up, whether I'm the consultant or I'm the consultee, is some helpful questions. Whether they are theoretical questions to hold or clinical questions to hold, or whether they're actual questions that you would pose to the client. For example, maybe you've forgotten to ask about their sleep or their appetite, and that could be really relevant information. And that's a very, concrete action step kind of question, right? On the other hand, it could be, there was one time when my consultant, Stephanie, asked me, she said, does this client have any empathy? And it was so interesting that I could talk about the client's loyalty and I could talk about the client's obligations, but I could not actually uncover, where this client demonstrates empathy. And that was very revealing. And so that was not a question that I would bring back to the client, right? But a very helpful question nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. They might be something that you literally go back and ask the client, or they might be something, like you said, that you can't even answer right now, but you're like, whoa, this gives me a lot of food for thought. This is something really important for me to consider or take note of. Yeah. And would you like to use like in your template that actual phrase? I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I like that it's open. It could mean quite a few different things.
Right. For example, a particular therapist that was transitioning a client over said, make sure that you probe her disappointment towards me for not being able to continue with her at this time. It will be really helpful in the process. So that was a question that the therapist was offering me as a gift to hold on to and appropriately work with. Because this client had a history of, abrupt endings in her life, and therefore to process this one.
Yeah, very much. I think for this one too, it would be helpful to have just a random other section. Yeah. Because you're going to have things that are going to come up that you'll just want space to document somewhere, but it's not really going to fit in well. And again, maybe out of that, you create something different over time. Does this seem like these topics would cover it?
This is great. Yeah, I'm sort of like scanning this note that I have here, and I think it really does.
Cool. Yeah, and of course, this you might have like a lot more space just so you can free write while you're, and ideally, if you could mostly complete this note while you're on the phone, then it's serving its true purpose, right? Which, like you said, is how is this going to help me later?
Yeah. I think, though, with a lot of the consults, I do like to spend a little time later just sitting with it. So I wouldn't mind still continuing to make my haphazard note and then come back and use the time while I'm filling this out to think through. That's one of the ways in which I process information. So I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. And the interview that should be released the week before this interview, we actually talk about that in the process of just regular notes is like having this time to process notes, and talking with Erin Finley, and she was mentioning like she really uses that time to process the sessions. And so but she really kind of needs a little bit of time away from the session. It's not something she can just do right afterwards. And I think that's totally fair. Sometimes you distance yourself a little bit and then you come back to it and you have some new insight or something different to bring.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I'm thinking too, we should have,
of course,
name of consultant. Or you could just have consultant, or title it, whatever. And then of course I haven't added these, but you would have, like your date, and then these I would consider a regular note where I would sign it to at the bottom.
Great. This is really helpful.
Yes, I think this will be really helpful for everybody because these are not notes that I have yet. So everybody's going to benefit from this and steal your templates.
I'm going to be super excited to use them. In fact, I can't wait. I cannot wait. Cool. Well, can we end now so I can do this?
I know. And I think maybe we could just spend a couple minutes talking about the last one, but probably not create like a full template for it. Yeah. So we did collaterals, case consultations, and
co-therapy.
So why don't you tell people what you mean by co-therapy?
So last week I got to do a really, really fun session. I work with the wife, and my colleague Laura Siniego works with the husband. So both of us do individual therapy. And we did a co-therapy session with both therapists and both clients in the room together.
And you plan for this to be a semi-regular or ongoing thing, is that correct?
Semi-regular. So part of the rationale was, and there was definitely a lot of clinical thinking behind this. It wasn't just something haphazard. That we both felt like our clients would benefit from having couples therapy, but that their process might be disrupted by having a third therapist introduced into their lives. And so we agreed to do this work together. Since we already have the details of the case and we can support our clients, and we actually think that they're in a really good place to do this work together. So we had releases, and she and I had talked about it, and so we did a co-therapy session. And what came out of it is that we're planning to meet together in another month to do one more session. So in the meanwhile, there are action steps for each party to work on, and then to come back together and then work on some more, and then figure out what the next step is.
Cool. And do you and the other clinician plan to meet for case consultation in between that time?
So closer to, so maybe in about 3 weeks, we will check back in and see how each individual client has kind of incorporated some of the thoughts and experiences, because it was a very experiential portion of the sessions, how they've incorporated that corrective experience, and how we can then move into the next steps.
Cool. Yeah, and for that, I mean, obviously you're each keeping your own note of the session, so it could just follow your regular standard template, or you could sort of work off maybe a combination of this case consultation collateral template, like these two that we created, combine them in a way. I mean, those are just things that I'm thinking like off the top of my head.
Sure. Yeah. I think you're right. A combination of the regular template, because of course I'm still documenting in the file of my individual client, but I am documenting that it was a couples therapy, co-therapy session.
Yeah, because you have these two additional people in there, right? But yeah, it's different than having like, her husband and her father come in, right? Because right. You are sort of, you're having someone help co-lead the session. And so like we talked a little bit beforehand, this other therapist may bring in things that you hadn't considered or may work differently. And so things may come up that you're not typically addressing.
It was so rich. It was really nourishing to, do therapy with a colleague, because like you and I were talking about before this session, we don't often have the opportunity to see how other people do therapy. And so to be part of and immersed in an environment where you both get to co-create a therapy session with your clients, very, very rich. And to learn from somebody else's style of doing something, to watch their interventions and be like, oh, that was masterful.
Yeah, really, really awesome, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it changes the tone of couples therapy as well, because for both of these clients, it was as if their cheerleaders were in the room to help support their goal of working together, versus sometimes there can be that little bit of trepidation walking into a couples therapist of like, oh my God, they're going to point out everything that I'm doing wrong, right? And they didn't have that. So that really
I could definitely see it would be a really easy way for people to lead into doing couples therapy. Yeah. Very cool. And it sounds like it's sort of like an ongoing thing where you'll see how it goes and what happens next. And so who knows, it may be something you only do a few times. It may be something that goes on for a little while. But I think the important thing is you're doing what seems to be best for each of the clients right now. And that might change. Yeah. Cool.
And it was wonderful to have clients who were also open to the experience.
Yeah, obviously this would be it's a fairly special circumstance because you actually know the other therapist, and you probably wouldn't want to do that with someone you don't know at all. And cool. Yeah. So I think, with documentation, it's, maybe combining those pieces and adding in those extra things. I don't think it necessarily has to even be a different template, but I could definitely understand that there may be other things that are coming up from it that you want to be able to add in there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know we went a little bit long, but I think it was super awesome, and hopefully people find this really helpful.
Yeah, I found it very helpful. I can't wait to use the template. I'm ready to write this case consult note up.
Okay, I gotta send that email. And now, real quick at the end, I know that you also had another resource. Totally
yes.
off topic. Not totally off topic, but definitely
relevant to
applies
therapists.
To us.
Yes, relevant to therapists. So in January, I got together a group of therapists and invited a posture trainer to come out and to talk with us about posture and how to sit better in our chairs, so that we can have better back health, since a majority of therapists as they age complain about low back pain from the cost of the work that we do, which is sitting a lot, but also containing so much emotion in our body as we sit, that we can't just get up and move and shake it out and go to the bathroom and drink water and, like, that thing that you said was just, right? We just tend to sit and contain. And so ways to support better back health. And so I've been practicing the Gokhale method for a while and really enjoying it. Here's a book that goes with it, which is 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back by Esther Gokhale.
I like it.
And they have foundational courses that they teach around the world. So if you're a therapist who wants better back health, I think it's a good investment. And they do provide CEs.
Oh, really? Okay. Very cool.
Yeah,
and I think that's such an important thing because, and especially I think it's something you don't think about in the beginning, but if you can start off that way, and then like with me, always typing, always at my computer, always writing, that is really, really bad. And I am fairly short. And so I know some people, when I meet them in person, they're like, oh, I didn't realize you were so short. And so a lot of like furniture literally just doesn't fit me. Side note, yesterday we were in IKEA and the child size Poang, like the children furniture, fits me very, very well. So, my husband has a picture. So,
well, but as the saying goes, Melissa, good things come in small packages.
Thank you. Yes. But because of that, I will have very bad posture. I will find myself having really bad posture a lot of the time because my feet do not touch the floor usually. And might have to be like, my hands are way up here to type something. So I think it's really important for a lot of us to remember that, especially if we have the flexibility to set things up how we want.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Rajani, for that resource, for sharing with other therapists about things that you're just looking to improve and work on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for creating these excellent templates for me to be able to write the notes that I do need to write so I can get all caught up.
Cool. Well, you did most of the work anyways. All right. Thank you, everybody. And hope you enjoy.